All right. Hello, everyone again. I'm Dr. Betty May from the Office of Graduate Education and Life. We're really excited to have Dr. Boyd here this afternoon to share some insights about investing with us. And I know that you are excited to learn about the topic too. So I have put in chat a link to do the workshop evaluation at the end. And we would really appreciate it if you would take a little bit of time. It won't take you more than 2 minutes to do it. So we really would appreciate your completion of the evaluation. And other than that, we have we have Amy Primore, who's the director for Center for Financial Literacy and Education, and she will moderate the Q&A at the end. And Dr. Boyd, I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Betty. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm Naomi Boyd. I'm really excited to spend some time with you this afternoon. I'm the Associate Dean for Innovation, Outreach, and Engagement. And I'm also a professor and a chair of the Finance Department. And I work really closely with Amy in the Center for Financial Literacy and Education. So I really want this to be interactive. Please feel free to interrupt me as we're going through. I do have some slides put together because I want to provide you guys with a guide on how to think about investing. And Betty was kind enough to share some of your pre-questions or interests with us. So I'm hoping that some of this presentation will touch on those things. But again, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and Amy will help me moderate that as well. So to get started, when we think about investing, it all goes back to really thinking about financial planning and what your goals are. I was in graduate school my husband and I were collectively in graduate school for 10 years. He has a PhD in toxicology. I have a PhD in finance. And so we are keenly aware of the many challenges that you all face. But the most interesting part about graduate students is that everyone is coming from a different background, right? Some of you have been out in the world working for quite some time and now are coming back. Graduate students are very diverse in terms of their backgrounds, in terms of their work experience, in terms of their just overall life experiences. So some of you may have substantial levels of wealth that you're just trying to manage while you're in graduate school. Some of you don't, are early in your life, and that's certainly where my husband and I were when we were in grad school. We just wanted to make sure we had enough money to eat. So thinking about investing in 401ks and Roth IRAs and everything in between was not even something that was in our ability or our perspective, because we were putting ourselves through graduate school as very young, a young family. So, again, I think I'm going to take a holistic approach to this, but certainly feel free to reach out to me. I'll offer it at the end too, but feel free to reach out to me if there are any more specific questions that I can answer. When I have done these things in the past, I usually have a few students follow up with me, and I'm always happy to sit down with you. So what do we know about financial planning? We know that it's easier to spend than it is to save. And like I said, especially when you're in graduate school, it makes it increasingly more difficult to save any money at all, or even think about investing. But the world of investing has changed significantly. The accessibility of capital markets sort of creates an ability to put small amounts of money into the market to help you start to actually work towards some financial goals. Even if it's $20 a week, it's still something that over time is going to add up. The financial planning process, though, is continuously evolving. It's continuously ongoing. And you all are in graduate school for a reason, right? To better your life and to increase hopefully your standing in society and the amount of money that you're going to make. But it changes constantly, right? So as your financial situation and position in life change, your overall financial plan changes, your goals are going to change. And so it's really important to understand that this is an iterative, ongoing process, and there is no one right answer. It's a culmination of different solutions for different individuals with different situations. And it's easy to get overwhelmed, or it's easy to, sort of lose sight of the fact that life is a journey and it's not a race. I certainly, I think when I was younger, thought I would maybe even be retired by now. But that's definitely, and now I don't know if I'll ever retire. I like what I do. So understanding where you're at in life, understanding what kind of assets you have available to you, and really taking a more goal-oriented approach to managing your finances is something that I just want to kind of get in your perspective today. So managing and controlling your finances with a personal financial plan is ultimately going to help you achieve your financial and lifestyle goals as you work through your career. So why do we invest? We invest because we want financial independence. So I always like to start with a financial mission statement, right? Our financial mission statement for everyone should be to achieve financial independence, which means that we can retire at some point in life. We don't have to work. But on the other side, it is to avoid catastrophic loss. So any solid financial mission statement should avoid catastrophic loss, meaning we want to make sure that we have good health insurance. We want to make sure that we have an emergency fund. We want to make sure that we have good life insurance in the event of or disability insurance. We want to protect our assets that we have saved. And on the other hand, we want to make sure that our assets are working for us. So the first thing is that we want to do is accumulate savings for small as well as large asset acquisition, right? So if you are planning for, and we'll talk through some of the goals, but if you're planning for a wedding or planning to try to buy a new car or planning to buy a house, you have to start somewhere, and starting somewhere is the most important thing. And again, it's hard when you're in graduate school. You want to obviously save for retirement. Ultimately, everyone would love to create generational goal or generational wealth, but ultimately we want to reach our financial goals. So there are 5 steps to the personal financial planning process. The first is just to take stock in where you are. That being in graduate school, you are doing the right thing, right? You are doing the right thing for your financial future, because your financial future is largely going to depend on your education. And graduate school is incredible because it allows you to take a big step up in terms of your overall earnings. So you put in the time now, and you're going to be able to, really set yourself up for success and a big jump up. The second step, but you have to be honest with yourselves. I mean, I think that just like we go to the doctor hopefully on a regular basis, at least I take my kids to the doctor on a regular basis. You have to be realistic and take stock in what you have. And you can't let it overwhelm you. I've worked with a lot of clients in the past, especially ones going through divorce, that really felt like they were just floundering because they either had a lot of student loan debt or they didn't have solid income coming in. It doesn't matter where you are. It matters that you have it organized and you really have a good handle on things. Defining your financial goals. What are your short-term, intermediate term, and long-term financial goals? Ultimately, you're never going to reach your goals if you don't develop a plan of action and then implement your plan. And then step 5 is just to constantly review your progress, evaluate, and revise your plan. Like I said, from year to year, your life and your plan are going to change significantly. So it's really important to continuously update these things and not just simply rely on a financial advisor or a friend to take stock in what your goals and the level of assets and the types of investments that you are interested in pursuing. So the most important, again, first step is realizing where you're at in the universe. Where are your assets? Where are your liabilities? What kind of, in other words, what kind of debt are you holding? And then it's important to establish financial goals. So short term is less than 2 years, intermediate is 2 to 10 years, and long term is going to be greater than 10 years. Short term goals are things like saving for a down payment, or saving for a down payment on an automobile is a good example. Intermediate are going to be saving for a down payment on a home. Usually it takes more than 2 years to accumulate enough assets to purchase a home. And we'll talk more about a house in a minute, but a home is an incredible investment. So when we talk about investing, I'm not just here to talk about stocks and bonds. I'm also here to talk about alternative assets and anything that is going to add to your overall level of net worth. Funding a child's college education, that's oftentimes a philosophical goal. I personally would love to be able to fund my kids' college education, and hopefully we'll be able to achieve that. But I have plenty of friends who feel differently. They feel that children need to pay for their own education. And then long term, again, saving for retirement. We want to make sure that eventually we reach that financial freedom. So I want to talk just basic investments. When we look at our overall life cycle positioning, the first thing that we have to look at, obviously, is what kind of assets do we have available to us. But we also have to look at where are we at in life, and sort of lay those things on top of what our goals are. So typically when you're first starting out, you're going to want to have maybe a 90% allocation to equities and a 10% allocation to bonds. And I'm just going to talk about stocks and bonds right now. But as you transition into latter parts of your life cycle, and move out of those really early years, we want to change our allocations, right? Because our goals are going to change. So as we move through our life cycle, we want to transition out of really risky assets like stocks, and we want to move into, more bonds, more fixed income assets, maybe change our strategy a little bit, even with our equities, invest more in dividend paying stocks, or we want to increase our holding in what we would call alternative investments, right? Investments if I were in a classroom, I would draw a giant pie on the board. And when we talk about asset allocation, we're really trying to break up that pie, right? If you have $1,000 to invest, how are you going to piecemeal it into different categories to make sure that they have alternative correlation structures? And what I mean by that is, if something is going to affect one of the things that you are investing in, you don't want a house of cards. You don't want it to affect all of the things that you're investing in. And so you want what we call a diversified portfolio. You want to have your investments in a lot of different areas, so that you make sure that not only are you growing in different areas and at different rates, but you also have some of that protection. So that's that downside risk protection. A lot of people have a hard time just getting started. I know I see this with my friends, my family, my students. They all want to know what stocks to buy, right? I think that the more that you invest, there's a saying, buy what you know. I think the more that you invest in products and services that you use on a daily basis, the more interested you're going to be, and the better handle you're going to have on maybe some of the risk factors, right? So my husband always said when we had babies, we should invest in, Pampers, or Johnson and Johnson. And as you move through your life cycle now, I think my children's entire wardrobe is sponsored by Nike. So maybe we should be holding Nike stock. But I do think it makes that transition into buying stocks or bonds a little bit easier, because you're buying things that are familiar to you, and you're following things that are familiar to you. So I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with just simply when you're starting out, buying what you know. Now, for those of you who are further along in your career, maybe some of you have other types of assets. Maybe some of you already have 401ks or 403bs. Maybe some of you have a Roth IRA. I will say I wish that we had chosen to participate in Roth IRAs when we were really young, when we weren't phased out by income. So if you have any money whatsoever, I will say put it into a Roth IRA. While you're a graduate student and your income is somewhat limited by your graduate stipend. I think that it's probably one of the most valuable asset classes out there, and you have the rest of your life to invest in stocks and bonds, especially right now. I do think just from my purview on the market is that it is very overvalued right now. So it's hard to find those stocks that will potentially offer you a high rate of return if you're buying individual assets. If you're investing as part of a retirement program, the vast majority don't allow you to buy individual assets. So then you're going to be stuck buying mutual funds or ETFs. The things that you need to think about when you're buying into a retirement fund are really focusing on what are the expenses associated with those mutual funds or ETFs. The primary difference between a mutual fund and ETF are the fees associated with them. Mutual funds are going to be a compilation of different assets that a mutual fund manager is purchasing on your behalf. And so depending on what your goals are, depending on what your interests are in terms of investing, and especially focusing on the risk of holding particular asset classes, those are the decisions that you're going to make when you're looking at different types of investment alternatives. On the other hand, if you're investing in an ETF has very, very low fees because it's meant to just simply mimic a broad market portfolio. So it's not necessarily an active management of particular asset and moving in and out of different securities. It truly will just simply be mimicking the broad market portfolio. So oftentimes volatility in those can be a lot higher, meaning the risk is a lot higher. The up and down movements are going to be more extreme. But on the other hand, the expenses that you're going to have for investing in them are going to be very, very low. So I'm going to kind of stop there for a minute and see if anyone has any questions so far, or anyone has any specific questions about sort of more traditional investments.
I have a question.
Sure.
I don't really know what a Roth IRA is. I guess I could probably Google it, but seeing as you're here and a professional, I'd like to ask. And what is there any risk? Because I hear from a lot of people, oh, you should totally put money in a Roth IRA. Is there any risk in that?
There certainly is, because it depends on the assets that you're investing in a Roth IRA. And Amy, feel free to jump in here too if you have anything different, or I'm certainly not an expert on Roth IRAs, although I'm a big fan of them. The reason that people tend to push you probably toward a Roth IRA is that the growth of the Roth IRA is completely tax-free. Okay, so that means when you retire, you're accumulating all of that growth over however many years you've held that Roth IRA. And again, there is risk associated with it. You're investing in assets within that Roth IRA. So you can almost think about it like a different type of stock portfolio in a way, because there are assets backing it, and those assets are going to grow over time. But any growth that you have, you're going to be able to take those gains out. The other nice thing about Roth IRAs is that oftentimes, you can use, and I think this is true with traditional IRAs too, if I'm not incorrect, you can use a certain portion of them for down payment on a house. You can use a certain portion of them to pay back graduate student loans. I know a few years ago it was $10,000. I don't know if that amount has changed that you could take out, but you can take that money out without any kind of penalties. And so that ability to grow, without having to pay additional taxes on the gains is a huge benefit. And as we know, those things are going to grow over time, and you're going to accumulate a pretty significant amount of assets if you start early. The other thing to remember about Roth IRAs is the amount that you can invest is capped based off of your income. So at some point, and it's not very high, you're going to get phased out. So the more that you can put in early on, and again, put it in now, because none of you are going to be phased out as a graduate student, the better. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to add to that, right now, as a grad student, you guys can contribute up to $6,000 per year. So if you wanted to put in $500 a month, that would be the max. The IRS does not allow you to put in more than $6,000 a year. So everybody says, to max it out as much as you can while you possibly can. If you have that extra cash to put in there, it's really great. But like Dr. Boyd was saying, that once you hit a certain income level, it looks like for 2021, it's 198,000. So once you hit that income level, you actually cannot contribute to a Roth IRA anymore. So the sooner you can do it, the better.
There's a question in the chat, Dr. Boyd. I'll read it to you then. Should we do a Roth IRA if we have a 401A?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a different asset alternative. The 401, what did you say, 401A?
Yeah.
Okay, so 401k, 403b, any of those types of pre-tax retirement accounts are great, except you will have to pay taxes when you start to take the money out.
Mhm.
So the Roth IRA is the only, investment vehicle that you do not have to pay any taxes on the gains. So again, it goes back to when I said if I could draw a giant pie on our board, the Roth IRA is going to be another way to invest and reach your overall financial goals, but it just has different tax considerations.
Mhm.
It's very advantageous.
And Jocelyn has a question, raised her hand. So Jocelyn, go ahead and ask.
Thank you. I have two questions actually. The first one being, you mentioned that we can use the Roth IRA for down payment. How does that exactly work?
When you go to buy your home, you would simply provide documentation to whoever is managing your Roth IRA that you were using the funds to actually put down a portion for your down payment on your home.
So we don't have to take out the money, or how? So if we take out the money, there won't be like the only penalty.
Exactly. So you would actually take out the money. And then you would provide documentation, probably with your closing papers, to the administrator of the IRA.
Makes sense. And my second question was, how do you compare, like, I know Fidelity, Vanguard, how do you compare the different fiduciaries or banks to get a Roth IRA bank account in?
So you can, I would say, some simplicity is always better. It's really nice to have all of your accounts housed in one organization, but you do have to pay attention to, there are a lot of different banks out there. There are a lot of different products out there. So the first consideration you should have are what are the expenses associated with it? Because I've noticed even, with looking at ETFs, the rates of return and the expenses for seemingly very similar products are extremely varied. I'm pretty sure that you can even open up a Roth IRA with a TD Ameritrade account, or if you participate. I don't know if graduate students have retirement benefits at WVU. I know I did at my institution when I was getting a PhD, but when you start working, whoever you would have a retirement account with, or if you've worked in the past, it would make sense just to simply contact them. But yeah, just really pay attention to those fees. I would say but the things are competitive enough out there, especially with Roth IRAs. It's probably not that big of a difference. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I was just curious because I've been reading that different bank account, if you get it through a credit union, they give you like 5% interest versus like Fidelity would give you 3% interest. So I've been getting suggestions to like shop around for Roth IRAs, kind of. So I was just wondering. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, there's another hand. Is it Eileen? Go ahead, Eileen.
Hi, yeah, it's Ellen, but one of my questions is, having I currently have a Roth IRA that was a rollover from a 401k when the company closed, and I ended up with the IRA. But when it comes to, you know, future careers and future employment businesses that, you know, potentially would offer a 401k option, would that be beneficial, or I guess, would there be benefits in rolling it into the employer's 401k, or, you know, just does it depend on what they're offering, basically? I guess pros and cons versus keeping it out or
Right.
rolling it in.
No, that's a really good question. No, absolutely do not roll it in. Hold on to that Roth IRA with everything that you have. You can always contribute to a 401k, but most 401k plans are, to be perfectly honest, they're pretty bad. Even our 403b plan here at WVU is absolutely atrocious. The rates of return that you can earn are pretty much minimal. The fees are extremely high. So, you know, I don't want to discourage anyone from participating in a 401k or 403b. I think it's really important to take advantage of those things, especially up to the amount that your employer is matching. So here at WVU, we put in 6% and the university puts in 6%. So everyone is, you know, should be taking advantage of that match. Now, beyond that match, I think it's a good idea to first max out your Roth IRA. And then, you know, if you feel confident enough to put money into a brokerage account, have that as an opportunity, because that money is going to be so much easier to access. So there's like liquidity benefits to that. You can actually actively manage the assets under your control. Whereas with a 401k, you're paying pre-tax, which is great. It's reducing your tax burden, but you're not able to get that money out without significant penalties.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jesselyn has another hand up.
No, I think I forgot to lower my
Oh,
hand.
okay. Okay. Then I don't see any more questions, Dr. Boyd.
Okay. All right. Okay. So now I want to kind of switch gears a little bit to talk more holistically about investing, especially with, you know, the many investment opportunities that are out there these days. So what are what we call alternative investments? Alternative investments are any investments that exclude cash, stocks, and bonds. So what you would consider to be like your traditional asset classes, and that would include Roth IRAs, that would include traditional IRAs, you know, savings accounts, all of those types of investments that, you know, you typically think of. So what some examples of this, first and foremost, are real estate, right? Both sets of my parents, my in-laws, as well as my parents have a healthy fear of the stock market, let's put it that way. And so both of them, you know, the way that they have basically financed their retirement is actually in real estate investing. And now, you know, as they're aging, all of us kids are trying to convince them that they just need to sell their real estate and actually put it into traditional investing, because there are a lot of considerations that we have to make when maintaining properties and dealing with renters and things like that. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. Other examples are private equity or venture capital. This is becoming more and more accessible, even for small individual investors. Fintech is really changing the landscape of how and where and when we can invest, right? So if we have, when I teach finance, you know, I usually start with what's considered to be, you know, kind of the consumer choice problem in finance. And what we mean by that is really looking at how do we incentivize people to save money today to have additional funds in the future, because we're predisposed as consumers to actually spend everything today. And what fintech is doing, and the way that we do that is by offering a positive rate of return. But what fintech is doing is it's allowing participation, wide scale participation in even like peer-to-peer lending, right? So, you know, even the GoFundMe pages, that would be considered to almost be a peer-to-peer, although you're not getting paid back. It's more of it is a donation. But it's a way to access capital in a way that is under non-traditional means. And I think as fintech comes more and more into vogue, as we start to see more opportunities for different ways to invest, and it may be as simple as logging into an app and seeing, you know, here are all of these people ranked by their risk characteristics that are based off of probably their income and their credit score. And being able to actually directly invest into projects that they need funding for. Everything from a payday loan, it might get rid of all those payday loans, to, you know, I had a group of students who wanted to have peer-to-peer lending for college students, which I think is actually a great idea. The vast majority of college students are, you know, barely able to eat by the end of the semester. They need to go home and work for a little bit and save up resources again. But it may also open up opportunities for direct investment in, you know, in local communities, which historically has been, you know, sort of positioned through small business loans or these larger private equity or venture capital funds. So it's just providing the general public with more and more accessibility and more opportunity to invest in a wide variety of products and services and have fractional ownership in things. So it's a really exciting time actually in investments right now, because there are so many different opportunities. Whereas we used to be very limited in terms of how accessible are capital markets, and beyond that, the costs associated with investing were very, very high, meaning we could only invest in certain asset classes if we met a certain threshold. Now all of that is going away, and you can, you know, see that in what's happening with the digital currencies like Bitcoin. You don't have to buy one Bitcoin, which is valued at like $45,000 now. You can have fractional ownership in that. I actually stopped at a gas station on the way to University High School to pick up my son, and there was a Bitcoin ATM, which I thought was bizarre. So I'm not exactly sure how that works. I was afraid to even stand next to it. But again, accessibility is more, and it's becoming more and more with these digital currencies. And so I think digital currencies are really taking off as institutional investors. And I mean, as we're getting stations and gas stations in Morgantown, West Virginia, even understanding that marketplace and the ability to participate in that marketplace is really, really, it's a fascinating time. And if you think about it from a diversification perspective. So again, what piece of the pie are you going to hold? I think holding some of your funds in digital currencies is, you know, a good way to go. It's definitely the way of the future. You have to be careful with, obviously, with the volatility. It's going to be pretty significant. So we're seeing huge swings in volatility right now. But the currency, the Bitcoin currency has gone up. I mean, I think it was like $8,000 last fall. And now the last time I looked, we were at about 45,000 for a coin. Other types of alternative investments are things like wine and shoes and cars. I know, especially just from having teenagers, a lot of their friends will go and find these rare shoes and then resell them online. And, you know, kids are making substantial amount of money doing these types of things. You know, everybody wants to be TikTok famous these days. Certainly that's not an investment alternative, but it is certainly a means of cash flow for a lot of people these days, are all of these sort of side projects that they can invest in. So overall, alternative investments are going to cover, you know, a wide range of assets and different strategies. The nice thing about alternative investments, like I said before, is that they have low correlation, typically, historically speaking, to traditional investments like stocks and bonds. So again, if you're looking at your entire investing sort of portfolio, it's great to have things that are going to be gaining when other things are losing, because it just provides a consistent ability of your assets to really grow through time. Oftentimes there is higher return potential than traditional investments, but with more risk, with more return has to come more risk. And so the risk of a lot of these assets is very, very substantial, and you have to be aware of those risks. And so again, if you're looking at non-traditional investments, just make sure that the vast majority of your funding is in traditional forms of investments, because the rabbit doesn't always win the race. In fact, usually it's the turtle, right? They are more esoteric, and oftentimes they're going to be very, very illiquid. So again, going back to some of our examples, even, if you look at real estate, the real estate market is on fire right now, but historically there have been certainly times where you could not liquidate a home. And if you are facing some kind of cash constraint, or if you're trying to meet your goals and objectives, through your investment alternatives, it's liquidity is a very, very important consideration. So again, when you're looking at non-traditional forms of investing, an asset is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. And so you have to make sure that you're paying attention to what is the market for this particular asset? When am I going to need to turn it into real dollars? And if there's no rush, or if it's a small percentage of your portfolio, if you have other ways to access cash, then it doesn't necessarily matter in the grand scheme of things if you have some of your money tied up. They do have longer lockup periods, meaning that shares or interests may not be able to be redeemed or sold on a daily basis. So again, this is lending itself to less liquidity in these types of assets, because they do have complex investment structures and higher risk return profiles. Sometimes there are higher minimum investment requirements, right? If you want to purchase a home and you don't want to pay mortgage insurance, you have to be able to put 20% down. But you can certainly, do that for a variety of means of, accessing different sources of capital. So you just have to make sure that you understand the risk and return, that these alternative assets fit into your larger investment plan. Because again, if they are, the vast majority of your assets are tied up in these non-traditional assets that may have higher risk structures and may have more liquidity constraints, they may not actually be helping you meet your goals. So as an example, I wanted to sort of talk through real estate, not only as, again, like I mentioned before, my husband and I's family are, this is how they have put, ultimately 9 kids through college, and collectively 9 kids through college. There are 5 in my husband's family and 4 in mine, but they are also using it to fund their retirement. My husband and I actually purchased a investment property recently. So I used to always love to use my husband as an example, because he always said that we needed to have this investment property. It's a house down in the Virgin Islands, because we go there every single year and have gone there for 15 years. And I, on the other hand, would always say, no, that is what you want. That is definitely not what we need. We do not need a second home. But with the increase in the usage of VRBO and Airbnb and things like that, as well as just simply being further into our personal life cycle, it started to actually make sense. And so we found a property. We laugh and say it was our COVID purchase, because we don't really slow down long enough to actually, look at something like this. But we had to, right? And it's worked out beautifully. The house has been rented pretty much consistently since the time that we purchased it last December. And it's definitely become more of just our retirement portfolio, because if you can pay for your retirement home by renting it out, why wouldn't you? And we're both in our 40s, so we have plenty of time until we're actually going to retire. There are also tragic stories with this house as well that I'll get into, right? So first of all, you have to pick a good location. So when you're buying real estate property, you want to make sure that it's obviously a desirable location. There are lots of real estate opportunities even here in Morgantown. But what you're going to have to deal with are undergraduate students renting it and potentially destroying it. The other consideration, and a big consideration that I always had, were what are the interest rates? Interest rates are at all-time lows right now, and inflation is quickly ticking up. So it's actually a great time if you can get your hands on a property that is not way overvalued. It's a great time to invest in real estate. I tell everyone should be taking on large amounts of debt right now because money has never been cheaper, and it's definitely not going to stay this way. You also have to look at the tax structure. Okay, so a lot of properties in high tax states like Texas or Florida that maybe don't have an income tax, which makes it attractive for retirees, but they have very, very high property taxes. So that was also a consideration. I think we paid $1,200 in taxes for our beach house last month, for the entire year. So, you want to make sure that you can obtain a property in a good location that is going to be something of desire that is desirable to either the short-term rental market or the longer-term rental market. You've got to make sure that interest rates are low because especially if you're not paying cash for a property, you have to maintain those expenses. You want to make sure that you can afford the taxes. You don't want to go buy a rental property in New York or New Jersey because you're going to be paying astronomical taxes. And then you have repairs. So although our house has paid for itself this year, everything that has come in has absolutely gone back out because everything that could have broken in this home has. So there have been several times where I said, you know what, forget this, I'm putting it back on the market and we're selling this thing. But then our property manager reminds me that, well, everything's brand new now. So hopefully it'll stay that way. But repairs are deductible, tax deductible as well. And so, if depending on the tax bracket that you're in, you may not necessarily want to be making money on your real estate investment at this point in your life, but later on when you retire and that the property is completely paid off, you could be using that as a source of income. Or you could use it as an investment property and sell it when you retire. So I think real estate is really interesting investment because not only can it provide you with income over the duration of your life cycle, it can also provide you with a large sum of money upon retirement that then you could roll into a different asset class. The nice thing too is that there are things called carry forward. So if you have more repairs than you can't necessarily take a loss on a real estate property in a given year, but you can carry forward those repairs or the costs associated with maintaining the home in, I think it's up to 3 years. So things tend to even out over time. Obviously, some years you're going to have more repairs than others, and you can use that for a tax planning purposes. So I use that as an example because I think that real estate is a really interesting alternative investment that, is a great way to diversify your portfolio, to provide you with sources of income, and also to, expand the things that you're actually investing in to protect yourself from risk. So that's all I really had for slides, but I wanted to sort of just open up the floor to any questions that you guys have about anything.
Dr. Boyd, there's a question in the chat for you to elaborate on land as an investment.
Land?
Yes.
Okay. Like just purchasing raw land? Is that the...
Yes. Hi, Dr. Boyd. Emilia. Hi, how are you? So thinking of probably leaving a couple of land acquisitions for children, don't have money to develop. A lot of lands coming up at where I live at. My concern has been taxes on the land and how to maintain it or hold on to it for the long term. I have little children. So that's what I wanted you to elaborate. And also second question on 529. I have for the kids, I've been borrowing from it anyway, but I am thinking, I recently read something about transferring or rolling over 529 into a Roth or some form of IRA to maximize it. I read that a lot of wealthy people are doing that. If you can really elaborate on that as well. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think, land is always a great investment strategy, especially if you, want to leave it for your children. I've oftentimes we live in a neighborhood that has a lot of land surrounding us, and I joke with my children that I'm going to buy all the lots around us so that I can keep them close, and I'll gift it to them if they build houses there. So we'll have our compound. But I do think it just depends on what your strategy is, with the children, if that was your approach, or if it's just, more of just leaving your kids some kind of tangible asset. It also depends on, how big is the piece of property that you're talking about. I mean, certainly with lumber prices the way they are, I wish that I had, followed in my father's footsteps and bought a lot of land with, the large quantities of trees on it. So I think it's definitely a good strategy or approach, but it just sort of depends on what your goals are, I think, with it, because it like you said, pointed out, maintaining that land can be somewhat cumbersome. On the other question, the 529s, I would say absolutely maximize those Roth IRAs. They're much better investment vehicles than 529s. I actually just opened a 529 for my children within the last 3 years because I think they're terrible investments. And the only reason I did was because in the state of, I needed a tax shelter, and that was one of the strategies that I was taking to reduce my tax burden in the state of West Virginia, because they actually have pretty good tax benefits in West Virginia if you hold it in this state. The rates of return on them are terrible. The fees associated with them are terrible. And they limit you in terms of what you can actually use them for. So you can only use them for qualified expenses. So for the longest time, I only had one 529 I have 3 children. So I had a 529 for my son because you can roll it over to the next child. And chances are that my son, probably more than even my 2 daughters, will be getting a lot of scholarships for college. So he may not even need any at the 529 money. But then knowing how my daughters were, I figured I better have 529 plans in their name as well. So I opened up, and they went to a private school. So that was the other consideration when Trump changed the usage of 529s to include, funding up to $10,000 of private school education. That was a big incentive too. I just would basically roll money through each year for funding their education through each one of their 529 plans. But yeah, personally, if you can roll money out of your 529 directly into a Roth IRA, I don't personally know anything about that. I would make sure that you aren't going to get any fees or penalties for doing that. But if you aren't, I think it's a great way to go. I think it makes a lot of sense because not only are you contributing, they can pull out $10,000 or whatever the limit is from the Roth IRA to fund their education, but then they're building up a retirement, account that they can actually use for other purposes. And there's just a lot more accessibility, and you're starting them out really young. I think that there are limits on when you can open up a Roth IRA, so you would have to look into that as well. Amy, you might know more, but I don't know what the age limits are. I wanted to say 17, but I'm not sure.
I don't know. I'll quickly look here while we're talking. Toby, you had your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question while I research that real quick?
Yeah, this may not actually even be part of this, the scope of this discussion and everything, but I recently also got into real estate and actually grew a lot faster than I expected to grow. I've now got 5 properties this year that I've taken over. But my question is I've had to create an LLC. Do you have any experience converting your real estate after you've already started over to the LLC, or any in your network that you could point me into the right direction?
I am in the process of doing the same thing, Toby. So while I don't have any direct firsthand experience, I do know that all our real estate attorneys are pushing us towards doing that. I think it's more for liability purposes, because in the event that anyone sues you, they would be able to come after your assets. So I think it's relatively easy to roll them into an LLC. I don't think that it's, I would just say, make sure that you have a good attorney that is doing it for you.
Dr. Boyd, there are a few more questions in the chat. I'm going to read them to you. What do you think of apps like Robinhood?
So I think apps like Robinhood are great in a lot of ways because they're providing you with access, right? There are no fees associated with trading in either Robinhood or TD Ameritrade. I personally have a preference for TD Ameritrade. I think that they give you more accessibility to the market. I think that the other thing that you have to look at with current markets is how quickly your transactions are being processed. And I think that there's more of a lag with Robinhood. And so oftentimes you're getting a less preferred price with Robinhood than you are with TD Ameritrade. TD Ameritrade has great execution. And there are no fees associated with investing in it. And like I said before, the research tools that TD Ameritrade offers are phenomenal. You have the ability to actually trade paper money, so you can try out different strategies or approaches. You have Thinkorswim, where you actually have real-time data that you can pay attention to. You can look at liquidity, you can look at how the price is moving over time. And again, watch a lot more and learn a lot more on the technical side of trading. Actually, all of my college students are required to open up a TD Ameritrade. But I know, for younger generations, Robinhood seems to be sort of the preference. So I mean, I think it just depends on which one you want to use, but I think they're great in that they provide a lot of accessibility.
Second question, what blogs or books would you recommend to learn more? This is another question, not about Robinhood.
That's a good question. I mean, I make all of my my college students read, oh gosh, it's like my mind has just gone blank. I will send Betty some
Yes.
good books. I have a bunch of books in my office that are good. I just, for some reason, can't think of anything.
Sure, no problem. Yeah.
Off of my head.
Mhm.
I think the best way to learn about investing is just to start investing. And in a way that's dangerous, but during quarantine, I actually taught a group of high school students about investing, and we would meet once a week and just talk through different strategies or approaches. I really think, even if you're just trading paper money, getting in and understanding the basics of the market is a great way to learn about it. Obviously, you don't want to, take on more risk than you need to. Amy, do you have any books off the top of your head that you would recommend? Since I'm having
I don't have any books per se, but I've recently followed some different bloggers that are good investment people that I will put in the chat as well.
Okay, here's another question. Are there any investing websites you recommend that are safe to use? Something like Stash?
I have not heard of Stash. Again, for most of my research, we use TD Ameritrade in the College of Business, and this is a resource that you all could use as well. We do have a Bloomberg trading lab, and Bloomberg is a phenomenal research tool. So you could always, if you wanted to go hang out in the lab, we have GAs that work in there as well and could help guide you or help you with some research.
Okay, another question here. Advice for investment for children, IRA or what will be good for children?
I think, definitely the Roth IRA. Okay, so and Amy has put it in the chat that there are no age restrictions on opening a Roth IRA as long as they have earned income. So they have to have a job. But I do think a Roth IRA is a great investment for kids. But if you want to teach kids about investing, again, there are accounts that you can open up for your children on TD Ameritrade. I have an account that I primarily just use for teaching my students, but I have like $3,000 in there and I let my son play around with it. So, I think that, opening up a small account and letting your kids learn about investing is a great way to go.
Okay. Can you deduct and carry forward deductions for the cost of repairs on a second home that you're not renting out? For example, allowing a family member to live in there rent-free.
As far as I know, no, you cannot. You have to decide either. So when you are depreciating a rental or counting those expenses, you could, if you charge them anything, right? Charge them $10. I don't care. As long as there is some kind of fee associated with them staying there for the period of time that they are there, you can deduct those expenses, but it would be on a prorated basis. So if you hold an investment property, you're allowed up to 2 weeks a year to use that property for your own personal purposes. Other than that, it has to be available to rent. That doesn't mean that you have to rent it right now our house is not rented, and that's perfectly fine with me if it doesn't rent for the rest of the year. But the amount of time that we spend at the house just simply vacationing cannot exceed two weeks in a year. You can go down, you can go to your second home as long as you are quote unquote performing repairs for the home, which with second homes, there's always things to do. So it's not really difficult to, kind of meet those thresholds. But if you're using it more than that period of time, like let's say you spend all summer at your vacation home, for 3 months, a year, you're using the home, then you would have to prorate the repairs as well as the depreciation for the property based off of the number of days you have it available for rental.
Okay, so there's a second part which I didn't see until now. If it makes a difference, family member is disabled, just to the question that you just answered.
I don't think that matters unless, there might be special considerations if they were considered to be a dependent of yours. But that's probably beyond the scope of what I would deal with. That would be a great question for maybe an accountant, but you could consider them to be a dependent. I don't think that there's any.
Okay, quickly, another question. Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint for reference? I'm sure you will share that
absolutely.
with me, and then I will share with everybody. Okay, I think this is the last one that I'm seeing. Kindly speak on investing in precious metals like gold.
Sure. So I think gold has actually done really, really well in the last year and a half. There are a lot of, again, accessibility used to be a really big issue with asset classes like gold. But these days there are gold ETFs. The student managed investment fund that I run at the university, we have like 4% of that invested in gold, and it's done really, really well. Again, you have to be careful with precious metals for asset bubbles, meaning are the prices inflated? Silver and gold have gone through, several iterations of, these, what we would consider to be overvaluation of those funds. But I do think, especially right now, my sort of take on the market is that, again, it is very overvalued and inflation is my biggest concern right now. So, if you're looking to buy anything, go ahead and money is cheap right now, but I think inflation is going to hit pretty hard in the next 12 months. So that's gold, digital currencies are both going to be very good hedges against inflation.
That's
not investment advice though, because I'm not an investment advisor. It's just my personal opinion.
One question just came in. Can we join one of the student investing clubs?
I wouldn't see why not. We have a student investing club. It's a joint club with Chambers and the College of Engineering. So certainly if you're interested in learning more about investing, I would definitely to seek out that club. I could try to locate the president of that club and send it over so that you guys could get information.
Okay. All right. I see no further questions. It's 3 o'clock. All right. Thank you.
Well, thank
very
you so much
much.
for having us. And like I said, if there's any follow-up questions that I can answer or Amy can answer, feel free to look us up. We're here.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.